The Solstice drifted through the dark void of space, its hull battered by time and neglect. It had been years since the ship's prime, and even longer since it had seen any real combat. Once the flagship of humanity's most advanced fleet, it was now relegated to the back of the hangar bays, far from the eyes of the galaxy's brightest and most powerful leaders. Its systems were archaic, its technology obsolete. The United Galactic Federation had long since moved on to newer, sleeker ships with more firepower, and the Solstice had become little more than a historical relic. Commander Rachel Torres gazed out from the bridge, her eyes sharp despite the dim lighting. She wasn't blind to the ship's flaws. Everyone aboard knew how outdated it was. The Solstice's engines sputtered, the shields flickered when they were under strain, and even the weapon systems seemed to need more time than they had to charge. But Torres had always believed in the heart of humanity's greatest creations, their resilience. The Solstice was no different. Its crew, made up of veterans who had once stood at the forefront of humanity's greatest battles, weren't willing to let it die quietly. They weren't ready to just fade away. "Status report, Lieutenant," Torres called out, breaking the silence on the bridge. Lieutenant Cameron, the ship's tactical officer, glanced at his screen and sighed. "Same as before, Commander. The Solstice is still operating at 60% efficiency. The new fleet's on the far side of the galaxy, and we're stuck out here on the fringe, running pointless reconnaissance missions." Torres gave a short, tight smile. She had heard similar reports for the last few months, and she knew her crew well enough to understand that morale was low. They had been dismissed as relics by the Federation, and even though the crew was loyal, they were beginning to wonder if they would ever again see a real fight. "The Federation sent us here to patrol this sector for a reason," Torres said, her voice unwavering. "There's a purpose to this mission, even if it's not obvious. We just need to stay sharp. We'll make the most of it." The crew, though worn out, seemed to take comfort in their commander's optimism. The Solstice had seen worse. Much worse. Suddenly, the ship's sensors emitted a soft ping. Something had crossed into their path. Torres' eyes narrowed. She knew it wasn't just space debris. "What is it, Ensign?" she asked, her voice crisp as the sensor readings flickered on the screen. The ensign's hands moved quickly over the controls, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "It's a ship, Commander. But it's not one we've ever encountered before. The signature doesn't match anything in Federation records." Torres felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. The Solstice might be outdated, but it had one thing no modern warship could boast: experience. The Federation had dismissed them, but they still had the instincts of seasoned soldiers. "Can you get a visual?" Torres asked. The ensign nodded, manipulating the controls until the screen displayed a strange, sleek craft, a ship that seemed far too advanced to be anything from a race the Federation had ever encountered. It wasn't just a scout ship, it was a warship, and its weapons were already powered up. "Get us out of here, now," Torres commanded. But it was too late. Before they could even turn the ship, a massive energy blast slammed into the Solstice, sending the ship into a violent spin. Sparks flew across the bridge, and the lights flickered. "Shields are down. We're losing power," Lieutenant Cameron shouted. Torres gripped her chair, her mind already racing. Whoever these beings were, they were no simple raiders. They were prepared for something big, something dangerous. The Solstice had been outclassed, but they weren't out of options. "Prepare to return fire," Torres barked. The outdated ship, its systems now under strain, groaned in protest as its weapons powered up. This wasn't going to be easy, but it would be the first fight the Solstice had in a long time. And as she stared out at the incoming unknown ship, Torres knew that whatever was out there, humanity had just found a reason to fight again. The Solstice lurched under another blast. Sparks flew from the bridge consoles, and the hum of the ship's engines faltered. Commander Rachel Torres gripped the armrest of her seat, her mind already moving faster than the chaos around her. The unknown warship in front of them fired again, sending shockwaves through the aging hull of the Solstice. Damage report. Torres barked, her voice steady, even as the ship rocked violently. Lieutenant Cameron's fingers flew across the controls, his face pale but focused. Shields are down to 30%, Commander. The engines are failing. If they hit us again, we're dead in the water. Get those shields back up. Now. Torres commanded, her eyes scanning the unknown enemy ship. It was unlike anything she had seen in her years of service. The sleek, dark silhouette of the enemy vessel suggested advanced technology, far more advanced than anything the Federation had in its arsenal. Commander, Ensign Bennett called from the sensor station. I'm picking up more ships on the scanners. Dozens of them. They're all coming this way. Torres's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an ambush. It was an invasion. Who are they? She asked, her voice calm but edged with urgency. I'm not sure, Bennett said, eyes narrowing at her screen. They're using some sort of cloaking technology. We're barely getting any clear readings. Before Torres could respond, a low rumble echoed from below. A warning signal flashed on the bridge, and the ship lurched again, the emergency alarms blaring. The solstice had been struck again, harder this time. Engine room. Torres shouted, her hands gripping the console. Report. A voice crackled through the intercom. We've lost primary power, Commander. Switching to auxiliary generators, but we can't keep this up for long. Understood, Torres replied, taking a deep breath. They needed to act quickly. If they couldn't get out of this firefight, the solstice would be destroyed, and their mission would end before it even had a chance to begin. Lieutenant Cameron, she said, turning her attention back to her tactical officer, what's the status of our weapons? Cameron grimaced. The pulse cannon's offline, and the secondary turrets are barely functional. I can try to fire the forward plasma cannons, but it'll take time to recharge. Time they didn't have. Torres's mind raced, seeking a solution. The Federation had abandoned the solstice, but she wasn't ready to abandon it. She wasn't ready to give up on her crew. Not now. Can we use the electromagnetic pulse? She asked, the idea sparking in her mind. Cameron blinked, clearly surprised. That old thing, it's barely operational. We could try, but it might fry the entire system. Torres met his gaze. Do it. We don't have a choice. Understood, Cameron said, his voice grim but determined. The solstice shuddered again, this time from a near miss. The enemy was closing in, preparing for another strike. But Torres knew they had one shot at turning the tide. She needed to buy them time, just enough for Cameron to bring that weapon online. All hands, brace for impact. Torres ordered, gripping the console tightly as the next round of fire came in. The solstice shuddered, but miraculously, the hull held. The enemy ship loomed larger on the view screen, its guns charging for the final strike. Now, Cameron, Torres shouted. With a hiss of power, the electromagnetic pulse weapon flared to life, sending a wave of energy rippling through space. The solstice bucked violently as the pulse discharged, but just as it did, the enemy ship's weapons flickered, then went dark. The attack stopped mid-launch. Direct hit, Cameron said, a note of disbelief in his voice. It worked. The enemy systems are down. Torres didn't waste a second. Get us out of here. Now. The solstice's damaged engines hummed weakly as they began to retreat, slipping into the vastness of space. They were still vulnerable, but for the moment, they had gained precious seconds to regroup. As the ship slowly moved away from the now disabled enemy vessel, Torres allowed herself a brief exhale. It wasn't much, but it was something. They were alive, and for the first time in months, they were back in the fight. Ensign, Torres said, her eyes on the stars ahead. Keep those scanners running. I want to know everything about these ships. We need to find out who they are, and why they're here. Bennett nodded, fingers flying over the controls. Right away, Commander. The battle was far from over, but Torres knew one thing for certain. The Solstice and its crew weren't done yet. The galaxy had just become a much darker place, and it was up to them to shine a light in the growing shadow. The Solstice drifted through the darkness of space, still barely holding together after the brutal ambush. Commander Torres stood on the bridge, staring at the view screen. The enemy ship, once a towering threat, was now floating in the distance, disabled but still ominously intact. The crew had managed to escape, but only by the skin of their teeth. The damage to the Solstice was extensive, and their power reserves were dangerously low. "Commander," Lieutenant Cameron's voice broke through the silence. "We've lost communication with the Federation. The damage to the comms array is worse than we thought." Torres frowned. The Federation was their last hope for reinforcements, and with the communication system down, they had no way of calling for help. They were alone. She glanced around at her crew. Morale had been low before the attack, and now it had dropped even further. But Torres refused to give in to despair. There was always hope, even in the darkest of times. "What's our status on the enemy ship?" she asked, turning to Ensign Bennett. Bennett was at the sensor console, eyes scanning the data. "The ship's systems are still offline, but I'm picking up some strange energy signatures. It's like they're trying to reboot. If we don't act soon, they might come back online." Torres's mind raced. They had no idea who these enemies were, but they knew one thing for sure. The Solstice wasn't going to survive another direct hit. "Set a course for the nearby asteroid field," Torres ordered. "We'll hide there and regroup. We need time to assess the situation and figure out what we're dealing with." "We won't last long in the field," Cameron warned. "The ship's engines are barely functioning. We'll be sitting targets." Torres didn't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. "Do it anyway. We don't have a choice. Prepare for evasive maneuvers just in case." As the crew scrambled to follow orders, Torres watched the slowly fading silhouette of the enemy ship. The situation was dire, but she couldn't afford to let fear take hold. The Solstice may have been old, but it had been built to endure. And so had her crew. The ship navigated toward the asteroid field, its damaged engines sputtering and groaning with every passing moment. Once they were within the dense belt of debris, Torres gave the order to power down the ship's remaining systems to reduce their signature. They would have to rely on the environment to protect them. The bridge fell silent, the only sound the occasional hum of the ship's failing systems. No one spoke, but Torres could feel the tension in the air. Her crew was waiting for her to make the next move. "Ensign, I need you to keep those scanners running. I want to know everything about that ship. The energy signatures, the patterns, everything," Torres said, breaking the silence. "I'm on it, Commander," Bennett replied, his voice strained as he worked furiously to keep the sensors functioning. After what felt like an eternity, Bennett looked up from his console, his face pale. "Commander, I've got something. The ship, it's not from any known race, but I'm getting a match on some of their technology. It's Corathene." Torres's heart skipped a beat. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Corathene, what's that?" Bennett tapped the screen, pulling up a list of data. The Korath are a mysterious species from the outer reaches of known space. They were thought to be extinct, just another piece of galactic history. But from what I can see, their technology is far beyond anything the Federation has. If this is really them, we're in serious trouble. Torres's mind began to race as the pieces clicked into place. The brutal efficiency of the Korath ship, the advanced weaponry. It all made sense now. The Federation had dismissed them, but the Solstice had just discovered something far worse than they could have imagined. "Can we disable their ship's power systems?" Torres asked. Bennett's fingers moved quickly over the console. "Possibly, but it won't be easy. Their technology is unlike anything we've ever seen. We'll need to get close and plant a disruption device, but we don't have the resources for that." Torres's jaw clenched. If the Korath were back, there was no time to waste. The Federation wouldn't take action unless they had proof of the threat. It was up to her and the crew of the Solstice to stop them before they could launch their invasion. "We don't need Federation resources," Torres said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We've got what we need right here. We'll find a way to take them down, one step at a time." With that, she turned back to the view screen, her mind already planning their next move. The Solstice may have been written off, but its crew still had a fight in them. And no matter how impossible the odds, they weren't giving up without a chance to win. "Lieutenant Cameron," she said, "prepare the crew. We're going to infiltrate that ship." The Solstice coasted silently through the asteroid field, its damaged systems barely keeping the ship on course. Commander Torres stood on the bridge, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the control panels. The ship's engines hummed weakly, a constant reminder that they were operating on borrowed time. The Korath vessel loomed ahead, just out of reach, but Torres knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Every moment counted. "Commander," Lieutenant Cameron said, breaking the silence, "we've got the Korathian ship on our scanners. It's still trying to reboot, but it's only a matter of time before they're back up to full power." "Then we don't have much time," Torres replied, her voice resolute. "Ensign, get us close. We'll slip in under their radar and board their ship." Ensign Bennett's fingers flew over the console. "Approaching now. We're almost at the edge of their detection range." Torres clenched her fists. If they were going to infiltrate the Korathian ship, they had to move quickly. The Solstice wasn't designed for this kind of operation, and their chances of success were slim. But they didn't have any other choice. "Lieutenant," Torres said, her eyes scanning the view screen, "prepare the boarding party. We'll need to disable their engines and communications. If we can get their ship crippled, they won't be able to launch an attack." Cameron nodded, already moving toward the comm station to relay orders to the crew. "Understood. I'll have the team ready in 5 minutes." Torres paced across the bridge, her mind racing. The Korath were unlike anything humanity had faced before. Their weapons were devastating, their tactics ruthless. And now, they were on the verge of unleashing chaos across the galaxy. The crew of the Solstice had been written off as obsolete, but Torres knew one thing. They had something that the Korath didn't. They had humanity's tenacity, resourcefulness, and will to survive. "Ensign, slow us down," Torres ordered. "We'll approach from the lower side of their ship. Stay out of their direct line of sight." Bennett adjusted the ship's course. "Aye, Commander. We're in position." Torres turned to Cameron. "Once we're aboard, we'll split into 2 teams. Team 1 will disable their communications and sabotage their weapons. Team 2 will plant explosives in their engine room. We'll need to move fast. No second chances." Cameron met her gaze, his expression grim but determined. "Understood. I'll lead Team 1. "Good," Torres said. "I'll take Team 2. She took one last look at the view screen as the Solstice crept closer to the enemy vessel. It was massive, more than twice the size of the Solstice, and covered in dark, angular plating. The Korath ship was built for destruction, its design streamlined and efficient, with no signs of unnecessary ornamentation. Everything about it screamed menace. They were close now. A quiet tension filled the bridge as the crew prepared for the operation. Torres could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line. The fate of the entire galaxy could be at risk. "Boarding party, prepare for insertion," Cameron said, his voice steady. Torres took a deep breath and looked at her crew. Despite the odds, they were ready. They had no other choice but to fight. "Everyone knows their roles," Torres said, her voice firm. "We hit hard and fast. No hesitation. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." With that, the boarding party suited up, and the crew moved into position. Torres led her team to the airlock, her heart pounding in her chest. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Korath ship, disable their systems, and escape before they could retaliate. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only one they had. The airlock door hissed open, and Torres stepped onto the hull of the Korath vessel. The darkness was oppressive, the ship's exterior as cold and unforgiving as its occupants. As they crept along the surface, avoiding detection, Torres's mind was fixed on one thought. Failure was not an option. They reached a maintenance hatch, the point of entry into the Korath ship. With a quick signal, Torres's team set to work. The hatch opened with a low hiss, and they slipped inside, weapons drawn and senses heightened. The air inside was thick with the smell of metal and machinery. "Stay sharp," Torres muttered, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor ahead. This is their turf now. They had infiltrated the heart of the beast, and the real fight was just beginning. The team moved swiftly through the maintenance corridors of the Korath ship, each step taken with deliberate caution. The air inside was unnervingly cold, the low hum of the ship's advanced systems vibrating through the metal walls. Commander Torres led the way, her mind focused on their mission: disrupt the Korath's engine systems and cripple their ability to retaliate. Behind her, Lieutenant Cameron's team moved in silence, checking their weapons and positioning themselves to cover every angle. Their mission was clear: disable the enemy's main systems and plant explosives in critical locations. Torres's team, on the other hand, was tasked with locating the engine room, the heart of the ship's power, and rendering it useless. The Korath ship's design was as sleek as it was intimidating. Every corridor was lined with dark, featureless panels, and the occasional flashing red light illuminated the otherwise pitch-black halls. There were no signs of crew members, no guards, no security forces. It was almost as if the ship itself had been abandoned, though Torres knew better than to assume they were in the clear. "This is too quiet," Sergeant Walker, one of Torres's soldiers, muttered from behind her. "Feels like we're walking into a trap." Torres didn't reply immediately, but her mind echoed the same unease. It was as if the ship was waiting for them, watching them. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice steady. "We're on a clock." They rounded another corner and found themselves in front of a thick, reinforced door. It was clearly designed to secure a vital area, likely the access point to the engine room. Torres approached cautiously, raising her hand to signal for the team to halt. "We need to get this open," Torres said, motioning toward the door's security panel. "Ensign, can you override it?" Ensign Morgan, the ship's tech expert, nodded and immediately knelt before the panel. Her fingers flew over the controls, working quickly but carefully to avoid triggering any alarms. After what felt like an eternity, the door's lights flickered, and a soft click echoed through the corridor. "It's open," Morgan whispered, a grin of relief on her face. Torres gave a small nod. "Let's move." They pushed through the door, finding themselves in a vast chamber filled with hums of energy and flickering lights. The Korath engine room was unlike anything the crew of the Solstice had ever seen. Massive, pulsating core reactors lined the walls, casting a sickly glow across the chamber. Pipes and conduits snaked across the ceiling, feeding power to every section of the ship. The air was thick with the smell of machinery, electric, metallic, almost toxic. "We need to plant the charges on those reactors," Torres said, her voice low. "They're the heart of the ship's power." Walker nodded, moving to a nearby console. "I'll get the explosives set up. Shouldn't take long." While Walker worked, Torres surveyed the room, her instincts telling her that something wasn't right. The silence around them was deafening, the air too still. The ship's eerie lack of crew made her even more uneasy. Where were they? "Commander, we've got a problem," Bennett's voice crackled through the comms. "The Korath ship systems are coming back online. I'm seeing power surges across multiple sections of the ship." Torres's heart skipped a beat. They had no time to finish the mission if the Korath were waking up. "Get those explosives set. Now," she ordered, turning to Walker. "Ensign, prepare to blow this room if we can't make it out in time." "Understood, Commander," Bennett replied, his tone tense. Walker quickly placed the final charges on the reactor cores, securing them in place with practiced ease. All set. If these go off, the whole ship's going down. We got maybe 15 minutes before they're fully powered up. Torres felt the tension in the air increase. The mission had been simple enough. Get in, plant the charges, and get out. But the Korath were regrouping faster than anyone had expected. They had underestimated how quickly their enemy could recover. Time's up, Torres muttered, already moving toward the door. We need to get back to the solstice. Now. Just as the team was about to head out, the ship's alarms blared to life, and bright red lights began flashing across the walls. The door they had entered from slammed shut with a resounding clang. Panic flared for a moment, but Torres forced herself to remain calm. "We're trapped," Morgan said, her voice tight. "No," Torres replied, her eyes narrowing. "They've locked us in. Stay focused, Commander." Bennett's voice crackled through the comms. "The Korath are fully powered up. Their weapons systems are online. If you don't get out of there soon, you're going to be caught in the blast radius when we blow this ship apart." Torres's mind raced. They had no way of knowing how quickly the Korath would react to the disruption. But they were on borrowed time, and she knew it. "Move, now," Torres shouted, drawing her weapon. "We fight our way out if we have to." With the charges set and the ship coming alive around them, Torres and her team sprinted toward the nearest exit, knowing their next steps would be the difference between life and death. The Korath were awake, and the solstice was their only hope. But getting out alive was going to be harder than any of them had imagined. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor, each step vibrating under the metal floor. Torres's heart pounded as she signaled for her team to stop. Her mind raced, and every instinct screamed that time was slipping away faster than she had hoped. The Korath were waking up, and they were no longer in the dark. They knew the intruders were inside their ship. The plan had already shifted from sabotage to survival. "We've got company," Sergeant Walker muttered, his voice low as he peered around the corner. "At least 4 Korath ahead, heading this way." Torres's pulse quickened. The Korath were technologically advanced, but what made them truly dangerous was their ruthlessness and strategic minds. She didn't need to see them to know they were coming for them with deadly intent. "Form up," Torres ordered. "We're not going down without a fight." Walker, Morgan, and Bennett took their positions, their weapons drawn. Torres's eyes flicked toward the door behind them, the only exit. They needed to get back to the solstice, but it was going to be a bloody fight getting there. "I'm setting up an ambush," Walker said, crouching low. "We'll pick them off before they can surround us." Torres nodded, her mind already calculating their escape route. "Keep them contained. I'll cover the rear." The heavy footsteps grew louder, closer. The Korath were just around the corner. The ship's layout was labyrinthine, with winding corridors and dimly lit hallways that offered little room for maneuvering. The team was outnumbered, and they knew it. But that was nothing new. They had fought their way out of impossible situations before. "Ready," Walker whispered. The doors slid open, and 4 Korath soldiers appeared in the corridor, their tall, imposing figures almost glowing under the ship's harsh lights. They were clad in dark armor, and their eyes glowed a menacing red, a characteristic of their species that sent a chill down Torres's spine. The Korath had been a myth for years, ancient, nearly forgotten. But standing before her now, they were all too real. The Korath soldiers didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons, energy rifles that hummed with dangerous power. Without warning, they opened fire, the blasts lighting up the hallway. "Move," Torres shouted, diving to the side as the team returned fire. The first Korath soldier went down in a burst of sparks, but the others advanced without flinching, their armor absorbing most of the incoming shots. Torres's mind raced. The solstice was still out there, but they were going to need more than just weapons to make it out of here alive. "Walker, cover that doorway." Torres yelled. "Morgan, move up with me." Morgan nodded, her face grim but determined. Together, they rushed toward the advancing Korath, firing as they went. The shots ricocheted off the walls, the intense energy blasts lighting up the narrow corridor. They had to take the fight to them, not wait to be cornered. Walker's voice crackled through their comms. "They're flanking us. We need to move now." The situation was growing worse by the second. The Korath were relentless, using their superior armor and weapons to push the team back. Torres ducked behind a support beam, her heart racing as she tried to catch her breath. "We need to fall back," Torres said, voice tight. "Morgan, get to the door and override it. Bennett, we need a way out." The team responded without question, each moving to their assigned position. As Morgan worked to override the security panel, Torres kept her eyes on the Korath, who were slowly advancing, pushing them further into the maze of the ship. Seconds felt like hours. "Commander," Bennett's voice crackled again. "I've got a pathway. The airlock's nearby, but it's on the far side of the ship. It's going to be tight. Get us there," Torres snapped. "We're not dying on this ship." Morgan punched in the last sequence of the override, and the door to the next corridor opened. "Got it. Go." Torres motioned for the team to move. They sprinted down the narrow hallways, the sound of Korath boots following close behind. The solstice felt like an eternity away, but it was their only hope now. "Stay focused," Torres called, her voice sharp. "We make it to that airlock, we live. Get there, and we're out of here." They moved faster, the weight of every step pressing on their nerves. Behind them, the Korath soldiers were relentless, but the crew of the Solstice had something that they didn't: sheer determination. They had survived worse, and they weren't about to stop now. The airlock loomed ahead. Only a few more steps. A final push. But then, the worst possible thing happened. A loud crash echoed through the ship as the Korath forced their way through another section of the ship. They were closing in, fast. "We need that airlock open. Now," Torres shouted. Morgan reached for the door controls, but as she did, the power flickered. Sparks flew, and the door wouldn't budge. "We're out of time," Walker shouted, his voice tight with panic. Torres gritted her teeth. The Korath were closing in, and there was only one choice left. It was time to take a stand. The door to the airlock remained stubbornly closed, the hiss of failing power systems ringing in Torres's ears. The Korath soldiers were almost on them now, their footfalls growing louder with every passing second. The crew of the Solstice had pushed themselves to their limits, and the enemy was closing in. The airlock was their only way out, but it might as well have been a mile away. "We can't stay here," Torres said, her voice low but steady. "Morgan, do what you can. We'll hold them off." Morgan's fingers were flying over the door's control panel, but she shook her head in frustration. "I can't force it open. The system's fried. We need to get the backup generator online, but it's going to take too long." Torres didn't have time to think it through. The Korath were almost there. Every second counted, and the team had no choice but to make a stand. "Get ready," she ordered, turning to her team. "We fight, and we fight hard. Walker, cover the door. Morgan, stay close. Bennett, stay on comms. I'll take point." The team moved into position, setting up a defensive line in the narrow hallway. Their weapons were aimed at the door, but they knew that it wasn't going to be enough. The Korath were heavily armored, and far more advanced in their tactics. But Torres refused to back down. They had come too far to surrender now. The first Korath soldier rounded the corner, tall and imposing, with armor that gleamed darkly under the flickering lights. His red glowing eyes locked onto them, and without a word, he raised his weapon. A beam of searing energy shot from his rifle, and Walker dove behind a support beam, narrowly avoiding the blast. "Return fire," Torres shouted, her voice sharp. The sound of gunfire filled the air as the crew fought back with everything they had. The energy blasts bounced off the Korath soldiers' armor, but they kept advancing, relentlessly pushing forward. Torres fired her weapon again, but her shots barely made a dent in their defenses. The Korath soldiers had them outgunned, but the crew of the Solstice had something more. They had the will to survive. Keep them contained, Torres ordered. We just need more time. Walker fired a few quick shots, hitting one of the Korath soldiers in the leg, but the creature barely flinched. Another soldier charged forward, swinging a massive energy blade, and Torres had to duck to avoid the strike. She rolled to the side, bringing her own rifle up and taking a shot at the soldier's exposed side. The blast hit, sending the soldier crashing to the ground. 2 down, Torres grunted, her breath coming in short bursts. Keep moving. Morgan was still working at the airlock panel, sweat dripping down her face as she punched in command after command. It's almost there. Just a little longer, she called out, her voice strained. Bennett's voice crackled over the comms. Commander, the Korath ship is powering up its weapon systems again. If we don't get out soon, they'll fire. It's a matter of minutes. The words hit Torres like a slap in the face. The Korath would destroy the Solstice with a single shot if they weren't careful. But she couldn't afford to leave anyone behind. Don't stop, Torres shouted, slamming another Korath soldier against the wall with the force of her rifle. We're getting out of here now. Just as she said that, the Korath soldiers began closing in from both sides. One of them flanked Walker, pushing him into the wall with a brutal shove, and he gasped as his rifle skidded across the floor. Torres darted forward, using the distraction to take down the soldier, but the remaining Korath were relentless. The airlock control panel flickered back to life with a sudden whir, and Morgan let out a triumphant yell. It's opening. The team didn't hesitate. They bolted toward the airlock door just as the Korath soldiers started charging. Walker scrambled to grab his rifle as he ran, covering the team's retreat with a burst of fire. Go! 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 Torres shouted, her heart racing as she kept her gun trained on the advancing Korath. One final shot rang out, and the last of the Korath soldiers dropped. Torres didn't wait to see if more were coming. She dove into the airlock with the rest of the crew, slamming the door shut behind them. For a moment, the world was silent. The team was safe, but the battle wasn't over. They still had to escape the ship before it exploded. Morgan hit the button to close the airlock, her fingers shaking. We've got seconds before the blast radius hits. Bennett, get us out of here. Torres barked. Bennett worked furiously at the controls, his face pale as he manipulated the ship's failing systems. The Solstice was a wreck, but it was still their best chance. With a final hiss, the airlock doors opened, and the crew piled into the Solstice, staggering as they secured their positions. Engines are online, Bennett called, his voice tight. We've got just enough power to get clear. Torres grabbed the nearest comm. Full speed ahead, Bennett. Get us out of here. The Solstice roared to life, engines sputtering but gaining strength. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had escaped the Korath ship. Barely. The crew braced themselves for whatever came next. We're not done yet, Torres muttered, staring at the distant stars. Not by a long shot. The Solstice surged forward, its engines sputtering but somehow holding together. The Korath ship was already fading in the distance, but Torres knew their escape was temporary. They had narrowly avoided a complete disaster, but the Korath were relentless, and now they had the full attention of a species that would stop at nothing to destroy them. Torres stood at the front of the bridge, her hands gripping the armrests of the command chair. The faint glow of the console illuminated her face, but the tension in the air was palpable. They had a long way to go before they could breathe easy. Status report, she demanded, her voice calm but forceful. Engines are holding steady for now, Bennett said, his fingers moving over the controls with practiced speed. But I can't guarantee how long they'll last. We're running on backup power, and the Korath aren't the only threat out here. We've taken significant damage. Understood, Torres replied, her gaze never leaving the view screen. Isolate us from the Korath scanners. We need to stay hidden." Bennett nodded, tapping a few keys. "Running silent mode now. But, Commander, we can't run forever. They'll be sending ships after us, and we won't outrun them with these engines." Taurus's jaw tightened. She knew that, but she wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. "We don't need to outrun them," she said, her voice sharp with conviction. "We need to fight back." Lieutenant Cameron, who had been silently observing the crew's movements from the side, finally spoke up. "Commander, the ship's still running scans. We've got 2 incoming Korath ships. They've already picked up our trail." The reality of their situation hit Taurus like a punch to the gut. 2 Korath ships. If they weren't stopped now, the Solstice would never make it out alive. "How long do we have?" Taurus asked, turning to Bennett. 10 minutes, maybe less," he replied. "They're faster than us, and if we can't disable their weapons systems, we'll be caught before we can make the jump to hyperspace." A plan began to form in Taurus's mind, though it was a dangerous one. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide. They had to turn the tables. "Get us as close as you can to the first Korath ship," Taurus ordered. "We'll board it and sabotage their systems. If we can cripple their ability to pursue us, we might have a shot at escaping." "Are you sure about this?" Cameron asked, stepping closer. "We're talking about boarding a ship with fully functional weapons and a full crew. They won't go down easily." Taurus met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "We don't have a choice. This is our only chance." Bennett quickly adjusted their course, plotting the best route toward the first Korath ship. The crew was already moving into action, gathering weapons and preparing for what was coming next. Everyone knew what was at stake, and they were ready to do whatever it took. "Prepare for boarding," Taurus said, her voice firm. "We're going to hit them hard, and we're going to hit them fast. We don't get a second shot at this." As they neared the Korath ship, Taurus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline flood her veins. This was the moment. The Solstice had survived against all odds up until now, and it wasn't going down without a fight. "Once we board," she continued, her eyes scanning the crew, "split into teams. Team 1, take out their weapons systems. Team 2, head for the control room and disable their engines. We need to make sure they can't pursue us once we're done." "We're ready," Cameron said, a grim smile crossing his face. The ship grew larger in the view screen as they closed the gap. The dark, angular shape of the Korath vessel loomed ahead, an intimidating reminder of the power they were up against. But Taurus wasn't afraid. The crew had already faced the worst, and they had come out on top. "Boarding in 5, Taurus announced, stepping into the airlock. Her heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. She had led this crew through impossible odds, and she wasn't about to stop now. They had a job to do. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. The airlock hissed open, and Taurus led the charge onto the surface of the Korath ship. The cold metal beneath her boots was the only sound she heard as they moved into position. They were about to enter the belly of the beast, but there was no turning back now. The Korath would soon learn that humanity wasn't so easy to defeat. "Let's go," Taurus said. "We do this together." And with that, the crew of the Solstice stormed forward, ready to make their final stand.